You paid the down payment. You made the mortgage payments. You finally own your home. Or do you? Every year, there's another bill waiting for you. Not from the bank, from the government. And if you don't pay it, the house you worked decades for can be taken away. That doesn't feel like ownership. It feels like lifetime rent. Across America, property taxes are quietly crushing homeowners. As home prices surged, reassessments followed. Taxes skyrocketed. And suddenly, people aren't losing homes because they borrowed too much. They're losing them because they stayed too long. Retirees on fixed incomes, middle-class families, people who did everything right. But now, something unusual is happening beneath the surface. Several U.S. states are pushing back, not with small tax cuts, not with temporary relief. They're talking about eliminating property taxes entirely. Some are still arguing. Some have bills on the table. And one state is closer than anyone realizes. In this video, we'll count down the top 6 states trying to end property taxes and why this could quietly redefine what it means to own a home in America. Watch closely because the final state changes the entire conversation. Coming in at number 6 is Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania represents the starting line of this entire movement. Not because it has the strongest plan, but because it asks the most fundamental question. What does it actually mean to own a home? Lawmakers backing the proposal argue that true home ownership cannot exist if the government retains the power to seize your property for unpaid taxes. As long as property taxes exist, homeowners are not owners. They are tenants with better paperwork. That idea resonates with a lot of people, especially in a state where property taxes fund a wide range of local services and rise steadily over time, regardless of income. For retirees and long-term residents, the math often stops working. The house is paid off, but the cost of staying keeps climbing. The proposal in Pennsylvania aims to eliminate property taxes entirely. No caps, no partial relief, full elimination. And that's where the problem begins. Because eliminating a tax is easy on paper. Replacing billions of dollars in lost revenue is not. Property taxes currently fund schools, police departments, fire services, road maintenance, and local governments across the state. Remove that funding overnight and something breaks. Either services get cut, or another tax quietly takes its place. So far, Pennsylvania's plan has a philosophy, but not a fully developed financial engine behind it. There have been ideas floated, including taxing large university endowments and wealthy institutions, but nothing concrete enough to reassure voters or local governments. That's why Pennsylvania ranks number 6 on this list. Not because the idea lacks merit, but because intent alone doesn't change fiscal reality. This is the purest version of the argument against property taxes, stripped of political spin. It forces the question every other state must answer. If homeowners stop paying, who pays instead? Pennsylvania shows us where this movement begins, with belief, frustration, and a desire for real ownership. But belief doesn't balance budgets. And as you'll see, the states higher on this list start moving from philosophy to structure, from slogans to systems. Next up is a state with some of the highest property taxes in America, and a solution that divides homeowners more than it unites them. At number 5 is Illinois, a state where property taxes aren't just high, they're a defining feature of daily life. Illinois consistently ranks near the top nationwide for property tax burden, second only to New Jersey. For many homeowners, the tax bill rivals their original mortgage payment. And unlike income, property taxes don't care whether you're still working or already retired. That pressure is what sparked Illinois' proposal. Instead of eliminating property taxes for everyone, lawmakers introduced a plan focused on long-term homeowners. The idea is simple. If you've owned and lived in your home for 30 years, you've already paid your share. Under the proposal, your property taxes would drop to 0. For retirees and aging homeowners, this feels like justice. These are people who bought modest homes decades ago, watched values rise around them, and now face tax bills that no longer match their income. The proposal acknowledges a hard truth. Staying in your home shouldn't become unaffordable just because time passed. But here's where Illinois runs into trouble. This plan helps some homeowners and completely excludes others. First-time buyers, younger families, and recent movers get no relief at all. In fact, they would continue paying some of the highest property taxes in the country while watching their neighbors pay nothing. That has created a sharp divide. Critics argue the policy rewards longevity, not financial need. Supporters argue it honors commitment and stability. Lawmakers are now caught trying to find a middle ground, debating whether the cutoff should be 30 years, 20 years, or something lower. That tension is why Illinois sits at number 5. It represents a halfway solution. Real relief, but not systemic change. It reduces pain for one group while quietly shifting the burden onto another. Illinois shows what happens when a state tries to soften property taxes without dismantling the system behind them. And next, we move to a state where homeowners didn't wait for lawmakers at all. They took the fight directly to the ballot box. At number 4 is Ohio. And this is where the story shifts from policy rooms to living rooms. Ohio's push to eliminate property taxes didn't start with lawmakers. It started with homeowners who finally had enough. As property values climbed, tax bills followed. Families who hadn't moved, renovated, or changed anything suddenly owed thousands more each year. And for many, it felt arbitrary. The house was the same. Their income was the same, but the cost of staying kept rising. That frustration turned into action. A grassroots group called Citizens for Property Tax Reform formed with one clear goal: abolish property taxes entirely by amending the state constitution. Not a temporary freeze, not a cap, a permanent structural change. To get there, they needed signatures, hundreds of thousands of them. They missed their first deadline, which kept the issue off the ballot in the short term. But they didn't stop. The signatures came in anyway, enough to push the proposal toward a statewide vote in 2026. That matters, because once an issue reaches the ballot, it bypasses political hesitation. It becomes a direct conversation with voters. And in Ohio, that conversation is growing louder. But there's a reason Ohio sits at number 4 instead of higher. Like Pennsylvania, Ohio faces the same unavoidable question. What replaces property tax revenue? Schools, police departments, fire services, and local infrastructure all depend on it. So far, the movement has focused more on removing the tax than replacing the money. That doesn't make the effort weak. It makes it raw. Ohio represents momentum, public pressure, the point where dissatisfaction turns into organized resistance. It shows how powerful the property tax issue has become, powerful enough to drive a constitutional challenge. But momentum alone doesn't fund a state. And as we move higher on this list, you'll see states that don't just want property taxes gone, they're already building the financial systems to survive without them. Next up is a state that approached this problem not like a protest, but like an investment strategy. At number 3 is Kansas. And this is where the conversation finally turns from politics to math. Kansas lawmakers approached property taxes with a different mindset. Instead of asking how to cut them, they asked how to replace them first. The proposal centers around creating a long-term investment fund, inspired by sovereign wealth funds used in countries like Norway. The logic is straightforward. Rather than relying on homeowners year after year, the state would build a pool of capital that generates income on its own. Here's how it works. Kansas would eliminate certain sales tax exemptions, generating roughly $2 billion annually. That money would flow into a newly created fund, designed to grow over time. The state wouldn't spend the principal. Instead, it would use the investment income to help fund education, one of the largest expenses currently supported by property taxes. Over several years, the goal is to grow the fund large enough that its returns could meaningfully offset and eventually replace property tax revenue. This is a crucial shift. Kansas isn't promising immediate relief. Homeowners wouldn't wake up tomorrow with a $0 tax bill. But for the first time on this list, there's a clear financial mechanism in place, a system that doesn't depend on constantly raising taxes or shifting the burden to another group. That's why Kansas ranks higher than Ohio and Illinois. It treats property tax reform like a balance sheet problem, not a campaign slogan. It acknowledges an uncomfortable truth. You can't eliminate a major tax without building something durable to take its place. Of course, this approach still carries risk. Investment returns fluctuate. Economic downturns happen. And political discipline is required to keep the fund intact. But Kansas shows what progress looks like when a state starts thinking like an investor instead of a debtor. And next, we move to a state where this debate isn't theoretical anymore. Real legislation is moving, timelines are forming, and millions of homeowners are watching closely. At number 2 is Florida. And this is where property tax reform moves from ideas into real legislative action. Florida has been at the center of this debate for a reason. It's one of the fastest growing states in the country, with a massive population of retirees and fixed-income homeowners. Many of them moved to Florida for affordability, only to watch property taxes rise as home values surged. State leaders in Florida have taken a clear position. Homeowners should not feel like they're renting their homes from the government. Unlike other states on this list, Florida already has a bill moving through the system. The proposal would eliminate most property taxes, while keeping school funding intact. That distinction matters. It narrows the scope of the reform and makes it more politically viable. The timeline is also real. The bill has cleared the State House and is now headed toward the Senate. If it passes there, Florida voters would weigh in through a statewide referendum, with implementation potentially beginning in 2027. That's not hypothetical. That's a schedule. Of course, eliminating property taxes creates a massive revenue gap. Florida's answer is to shift the burden elsewhere. Ideas on the table include higher sales taxes and increased taxes on tourism, a critical point in a state where millions of visitors pass through every year. Supporters argue this makes sense. Tourists use roads, infrastructure, and services, yet don't currently contribute through property taxes. Critics worry that higher sales taxes could raise the cost of living and quietly affect residents anyway. That tension is exactly why Florida ranks number 2. It has momentum, legislation, and a plausible replacement strategy. But it's still a trade-off. Property taxes may disappear, but other taxes could rise in their place. Florida shows how close this movement is to becoming reality, and how complicated the final step can be. And next, we arrive at the one state that already has the money, the mechanism, and the clearest path to eliminating property taxes altogether. At number 1 is North Dakota, the only state on this list that already has the money to make property taxes disappear. What sets North Dakota apart isn't political will, it's structure. For years, the state has been building what's known as the Legacy Fund, a massive investment fund fueled by oil and energy revenues. Instead of spending that money immediately, North Dakota invested it. Today, the fund is worth roughly $9 billion, and it continues to grow. That changes everything. Rather than asking, what new tax should replace property taxes? North Dakota asked a different question. What if the state could pay homeowners back instead? The plan is simple and gradual. Homeowners already receive a property tax credit. The proposal would expand that credit every single year, using investment returns from the Legacy Fund. As the fund grows, the credit grows with it. Over time, property taxes don't get eliminated by law. They get eliminated by math. No sudden revenue shock. No massive tax shift. No dependence on sales taxes or political promises. Just a steady transition from taxation to investment income. The goal is clear. Over the next decade, property taxes would effectively fall to 0. This is why North Dakota ranks number 1. It doesn't rely on optimism or future legislation to work perfectly. The mechanism already exists. The revenue is already there. And the state doesn't need to raise taxes on residents to make it happen. Of course, not every state has oil reserves or a fund like this. North Dakota is unique. But that's exactly the point. It proves that property taxes aren't inevitable. They're a choice, one made when governments lack alternative revenue systems. North Dakota shows what real ownership looks like when a state thinks long-term, saves aggressively, and lets capital do the heavy lifting. And it leaves the rest of the country with an uncomfortable question. If one state can pull this off, why can't others even try? Property taxes were never supposed to feel like a lifetime sentence. They started as a way to fund local services, schools, roads, public safety. But over time, they evolved into something else, a recurring cost that never goes away, even after your mortgage does. What we're seeing across these 6 states isn't just a tax debate. It's a deeper question about ownership, stability, and how governments fund themselves in a world where home prices no longer reflect household incomes. Some states are still arguing philosophy. Others are experimenting with partial relief. A few are building real financial systems to replace property taxes altogether. And one has already shown that if a state invests wisely, it doesn't have to lean on homeowners forever. But there's no free lunch. Eliminating property taxes doesn't mean eliminating costs. The money has to come from somewhere. Sales taxes, tourism, investment income, or resource revenues. Every model creates winners and losers. And every state has to decide which trade-offs it's willing to accept. That's why this conversation matters. So here's the question I want you to think about. If property taxes disappeared tomorrow, would your life actually be easier, or would the burden simply show up somewhere else? And if you had the freedom to choose, would you stay where you are? Or move to a state that truly lets you own your home? Before you make any financial decisions, remember this video is for educational purposes only. It's not financial, tax, or investment advice. Laws change and every situation is different. So always do your own research or speak with a qualified professional. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We cover the forces shaping money, housing, and economic power before they hit the headlines. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.